You can label your notes, ecological tolerances and succession. Ecological tolerances. So like how tolerable is an ecosystem? Yeah?
Did you hear Dylan and I talking on the last video?
A little bit, but like it wasn't.
Sorry.
Oh, it's fine. I mean, no one can see your face, so no one's gonna know it was you. So I mean, now they know names because they watch these videos sequentially. But
Are you filming this now?
yeah. So, an ecological tolerance. This is what an ecological tolerance is. So, ecological tolerance refers to the range of the conditions such as temperature, salinity, pH, soil chemistry, oxygen levels, and sunlight in which organisms can best survive and reproduce. So every single organism is going to have an ecological tolerance, or a place where they thrive, and a place where if you push them too far, they are no longer going to survive. So these are two examples. We have a polar bear and we have a black bear. So same type of animal, they're both bears, but they have different ecological tolerances. So polar bears thrive in cold, wet climates where there's a lot of fish to be had, where black bears thrive in more mountain, foresty climates where there's a lot of vegetation around them. So all these conditions are going to be abiotic. Remember, abiotic means not living. So just like these are the conditions that make our biomes, if you change these abiotic conditions, it also can change the things that are living in those biomes. Which is why we are getting polar bears now, because the biomes that the polar bears and the grizzlies are living in have been starting to change. All right, am I good to go to the next slide? So basically, remember there's no blue on this, so you don't need to write this down. Some species have really wide tolerances, like a salmon, right? So salmon start their life in freshwater, then they go to the ocean, and then they come back to freshwater. So they can tolerate saltwater and freshwater, which most aquatic animals, like most fish or water mammals, can't do that. That is not an okay thing for them. But for salmon, they have a very, very large ecological tolerance, whereas other ones have very small ecological tolerances. So you might see something like this that will explain the tolerance. So the more things that an organism can tolerate, the bigger this arch is going to be. So I like to do this as DeHart's spiciness tolerance. So here we go. On this side, we'll have so if I'm having something, if I have food, I want to have flavor. Like I don't want it to be bland. Like if you go to England and you order a meat pie, you're like, oh, it's like a chicken pot pie. No, there's no flavor whatsoever. So this is like a chicken pot pie in England with no flavor. Not really my jam. Over here we got like ketchup. When I was a kid, I literally put ketchup on every single meat that I ate, like barbecue chicken, ketchup, meatloaf, ketchup, baked chicken in the oven, ketchup. Like I was a weirdo, but it's fine. Let's be honest, I said that. But so that's gonna be like marginal, like that got a little bit more flavor to it. Preferred niche right here. So I'm like a mild salsa girl. Like I like a little bit of heat, but like if I go to Taco Bell, I'm gonna have like the mild sauce. I'm not gonna dabble in the higher ones. Over here, we have like if I were to go to Cup Bop and I got like a level 5, I could tolerate it, but I would not enjoy it. So another example is my brother served a mission in Mexico, and we went back there to visit after he got home, and I was there and I was eating a taco, and I was putting what I thought was guacamole on my taco, and I was loading it up, and then I take a big bite, and my mouth is literally on fire. And I'm like, ah. But there's like people around me, and at this time I was 19, 18. Anyways, I was to the point where I'm like, I gotta be cool. Like I can't let people know that this is like destroying my mouth. And so I was like, I can handle this, but like I'm not enjoying it. It's fine. Over here is like anything that, like any hot sauce bottle, I'm not touching it. Any kind of like, if you want to eat a jalapeno or like, no, that's way out of my zone. My tolerance is pretty big. Like I can go from ketchup to like uncomfortably spicy, but I'm not going farther than that. So my tolerance is really big, whereas my sister's tolerance is really small. Her preferred spiciness level is ketchup. She thinks that's spicy. So hers is gonna be a lot smaller than mine is. Real quick, before I move on from this, what type of species or what type of group do you think is going to have a larger tolerance? A specialist or a generalist? Generalist. Generalists are going to have a larger tolerance, which is why they can withstand disruptions more than specialists can. Specialists have a very small tolerance, and that's why they're more prone to going extinct if there's like an invasive species or anything like that. So disturbances or disruptions are events caused by physical, chemical, or biological agents that result in a change in environment conditions that causes a pronounced change in an ecosystem. So as we were playing our board game, as we were going through, you guys were going through different disturbances. So volcano would be one, clear cutting, forest fires, floods, development being put up. Any of these things are disturbances, and this can start the whole idea of succession. That as soon as we have a disturbance in a community that is healthy, we're gonna have to start back at square one and start to build the community again. So at your guys' tables, I want you just to brainstorm disturbances. Like if you are done writing this down, talk to your table mates. What are some examples of disturbances? Actually, yeah.
I'm so excited for El Nino.
It's actually an El Nino year this year.
I know.
I know.
I'm a skier. I know it's gonna be good.
I'm hoping so. Because I saw this article, I was reading it, I was like, El Nino. I'm like, I need to show my AP kids this. Like, they know what El Nino is. And they're like, yeah, some El Ninos we get a lot, and some El Ninos we don't get so much. And I'm like, what the heck? So I'm hoping it's a real good El Nino. All right, eyes back up here in 3, 2, 1. All right, who wants to just yell out different disturbances? Go for it. Fire. Volcano. Clear cutting. Flooding. Storms. What? Humans. Did you say bears? Eating berries? Honestly, like, yeah. Bears. Beats Battlestar Galactica, right? Okay. I'm going to go back for dramatic effect. It took a while to figure out how to do this. Ready? Disturbances. I know. I'm sorry. I'll put bears on this next time. I'll have like a bear run across the screen. So, resistance. There are some communities or some ecosystems that are actually resistant to disruptions or disturbances. They are just built in a way that they can withstand them. So the ability of an ecosystem to remain unchanged when being subjected to a disturbance or disturbances. So some examples could be like, we had Traverse Mountain light on fire a couple years ago, right? So a lot of the naturally growing plants up there, a lot of sages, a lot of scrub oak, a lot of those things are resistant to fire being like coming through because they're used to it. And so rather than being completely killed off, they'll send new plants up through their roots. Since the roots are below the ground, they can pop back up really quickly, and so they're resistant to that kind of damage. So there's some ecosystems that are a little bit more suited to the disturbances that they've had. So through evolution, the plants and the animals in those ecosystems have become more tolerable to the disturbances, whereas some other ecosystems are not tolerable whatsoever. That as soon as you destroy them, like there's no coming back from it. Next we have resilience. So resilience describes the rate at which an ecosystem returns to its original state after disturbance. So some ecosystems are not super resistant, but they're really resilient, and they come back to what they need to be right after. Like they recover really quickly. Some are resistant, but they're not very resilient. They can resist certain disruptions, but it takes a long time for them to come back. So just to kind of recap what we did for our game today, who in here got set back really far due to a disruption or disturbance? Raise your hand. All right, cool. How long did it take you to get back to where you were before? Was it a long time or a short time?
Not resilient.
Okay, so some people were not resilient, right? Some people never got back to that community, which is fine. Did anybody make it back to the community they started at before the disturbance? Okay, we got a couple. So we have some resilient ecosystems out there. So some are more prone to come back after disturbance, and some are more prone to stop a disturbance from happening in the first place. We're gonna skip that. We're also gonna skip that too, just so you guys have more time to do this. So when we look at disturbances, we can see disturbances in one of three ways. We can have them as periodic, episodic, or random. So periodic disturbances are like fires in really dry mountains. So there's some places like California. California catches on fire every single year. That is going to be a periodic disturbance. Like it happens periodically, maybe not every single year, but we can kind of predict that we're going to have those things happening. An episodic disturbance is something that you know is going to be happening, but it's a longer time in between and you can't quite pinpoint it. So an example could be like El Nino and La Nina. So those are going to be episodic because we have episodes of having these disturbances coming, but we don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but we can be like, okay, it's been like 5 years, we'd be expecting this to come. Whereas periodic is like every couple of years. And then last but not least, we have random, which are your earthquakes and tsunamis. Apparently, I really love tsunamis, guys. Tsunamis show up on like all of my slides. But these are where you cannot predict them whatsoever, which is why it really bugs me. Everyone's like, oh, in Utah, we're gearing up for the big earthquake. And I'm like, you can't predict that. Like, we live on a fault line, yeah, sure, but like, you don't know how the fault line is slipping and like how much it's moving. Like, you can't actually predict that there's gonna be the big one. It's just random. Okay, cool. So we're just going to talk about succession. So succession comes after a disturbance, right? That's what we were playing with our board game today. That succession can either come from when an environment is turned completely into rock, or when a disturbance comes and wipes out all the plant life and you start from soil. So ecological succession is the predictable replacement of one group of species by another group of species over time in an ecosystem. So you're going to start with specific organisms that are going to break down rock and make it habitable for different grasses and flowers, and those grasses and flowers are going to make way for shrubs and bushes, and those shrubs and bushes are going to make way for trees. So we can kind of predict which species we're going to see chronologically after a disturbance, and that's what succession is. And so something you guys kind of experienced in the board game is sometimes succession can occur over decades, sometimes it can occur over centuries. So depending on where you are and the different conditions that keep on hitting your community, it can take a really short time to get back to the climax community, or it can take a really, really long time to reach that again. So what is primary succession? Let's get an actual definition for this. Primary succession is where succession begins with bare rock and no soil. So examples of primary succession could be a volcano, a parking lot, rock slide. Any of these things can create an area where there's just rock. There's no soil to start from. You're starting from the parent material rock. So as you guys experienced in the board game, when you start from rock, it takes a very, 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 very long time before you get any growth on it. Like, that's probably where you got stuck for the longest, was in the bare rock community, where the only thing that could help you was time. Fires couldn't help you, grazing couldn't help you, like there's nothing that would help this except for time. So when we look at primary succession, the very first species we're going to talk about are your pioneer species. So pioneer species for primary succession are always going to be lichens and mosses, because these are the only things that can actually grow on rocks, and their little tiny roots are what are going to start breaking the rocks apart, so we can start having places for annual weeds. And then annual weeds will lead way to perennial weeds and grasses, and perennial weeds and grasses will lead way to shrubs. And shrubs will lead way to small trees, and small trees will lead way to big trees. So honestly, when you're thinking about succession, you're always going to start with the smallest first, and those smallest ones are going to create or pave the way for larger organisms to come and inhabit this environment. So if primary succession happens when we start from rock, what do you think secondary succession is? You're saying it all right. Just say it louder. Soil, yeah. It's where we have a disturbance. So here's an example of primary succession, right? We have lava flow, lichens and mosses start growing on it. Eventually we have big things. Parking lot, we get our perennial grasses and weeds, and then eventually it can have trees in it. So secondary succession, sorry it's still in red, I should have changed it to blue, is when it occurs in areas that have retained their soil. So this process is more rapid than primary succession. So the idea of secondary succession is it's not quite as hard to get back to where you were before. Alright, so secondary succession, example could be a fire, and then you have little things growing from the soil, and eventually you're going to get back to your climax community. The example is like, this volcano's going off, but it's not like lava going, it's putting a lot of ash, and so we have all these trees being knocked over, but since the soil is still intact, over time you're going to have that growth doing it. Okay, cool. This is our last slide for today. So we're talking about succession. I want you to focus on these two things. So how much plant growth is happening and how much biomass. So biomass means like how much living stuff is in the area. So for early succession, plant growth is high. So we're getting a lot of plant growth because like a lot of weeds are going in and there's nothing blocking the sunlight, and so all of these things are going to start growing really quickly. But our biomass is low because weeds, although there's a lot of them and they're growing really quickly, they don't have that much mass. Like they're not like a tree trunk where they have a lot of girth and a lot of mass to them. So the biomass is actually pretty low when we do early succession. In mid-succession, we're gonna start having plant growth decrease because we're starting to get competition. So we're starting to have bushes that are competing with the grasses now, and so it's gonna slow down, but our biomass is high. And then we finally get to late succession where our plant growth is gonna be low because we're gonna have established trees. We're gonna have established species there. And then our biomass reaches a steady state. So as soon as we get to late succession, it's kind of like if you imagine going to a campsite, you have really large trees there, you have areas where different things are growing, but it's very, very stable. So that's gonna be your late succession. So those are all of your guys' notes today, which is awesome because the bell's gonna ring in 1 minute. Make sure to check your RTI scheduler, and next time we're doing a lab dealing with fish blood and temperature, and it's gonna be great.
Were you actually gonna touch fish blood?